maybe my parents. It's a big deal.
Oui, j'habite à côté.
Good morning, distinguished delegates. I now declare open the 969th meeting of the Legal Subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Distinguished colleagues, this morning we will continue our consideration of Agenda Item 8, national legislation relevant to the peaceful exploration and use of outer space. Agenda Item 9, capacity building in space law. And Agenda Item 11, general exchange of information and views on legal mechanisms relating to space debris mitigation and remediation measures, taking into account the work of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. After the adjournment of the plenary meeting this morning, the working group on the status and application of the 5 United Nations treaties on outer space will hold its 9th meeting. During lunchtime today, there will be one technical presentation by the observer from the National Space Society on the 18th Sustainable Development Goal, recognizing the imperative role of space in our future. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to continue our consideration of Agenda Item 8, national legislation relevant to the peaceful exploration and use of outer space. The first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. Chairman, in this subcommittee of legal affairs, quite clearly, we attach priority to legal matters. And this is worth recalling because in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee too, we have often encountered that many of the non-binding rules are in fact developed here. And ultimately, it would be desirable that it is we, the Legal Subcommittee, who promote these rules. Now, Mexican positive law is comprised as follows, based on a federal constitution, treaties that are convened by the executive power, by the federal executive power, and ratified by the Senate of the Republic, as is the case of the 5 outer space treaties. Then we have federal telecommunications and radio broadcasting laws, the general law on national assets, the law on civilian aviation, which we have also talked about in the context of airspace, and other various guidelines and legal provisions. Many of these rules and provisions are to be found in our compilation, which is available on UNOSA's webpage. Now, this legal pyramid, to put it in Kelson's terms, applies to space matters in my country. Based on the constitutional reforms that were published in the official journal of the Mexican Federation, in June of 2013, has gone through a variation of 100 degrees as regards the manner in which we regulate telecommunications, radio broadcasting, and information and communication technologies, satellites, and communication in general. The legislation stipulates inter alia that the state shall guarantee the right of access to information and communication technologies as well as to radio broadcasting and telecommunication services, including broadband and internet. Chair, I recall that we've ever had an opportunity to visit my country. Mexico is a very hilly country, very rough terrain, and therefore the broadband location of satellites is very important. The state shall guarantee for the population their participation in the information and knowledge society through an inclusive universal digital policy with annual and 6-year goals and objectives. And here, let me just share the following fact with you, that based on the constitutional reform and based on the programs that were launched by President Enrique Peña, we are in the process of implementing these in our country currently. At least 60% of the Mexican population now are connected to the net and to ICTs, not only through physical networks, but chiefly through satellite networks. One of the fundamental means used for broadcasting and transmission in Mexico so that our state can uphold its obligations and guarantee the rights of its users to ICTs, given the hilly terrain of Mexico that I outlined to you earlier, are satellites. In this regard, the National Development Plan for Mexico attaches an unusual degree of importance to space infrastructure, and this includes the inclusion of broadband satellites. Telecommunications, including frequencies and satellites, are part and parcel of our federal law on telecommunications and radio broadcasting that was recently published. Based on a number of amendments that have been made to this fundamental text, I would highlight that in order to uphold the political constitution of Mexico, the state shall at all times control the radio-electrical spectrum as well as the orbital positions allocated to Mexico that clearly are under our federal jurisdiction. Based on the development of the aforementioned secondary legislation, this replicates some of the provisions involving our activities in outer space. For instance, orbital resources. Satellite technology is crucial for Mexico's economic and social development, as this enables us to provide telecommunication services in areas that are remote and where it would be difficult or economically inviable to deploy other telecommunications networks. It also leads to the development of technology and helps create jobs with a high degree of specialization in strategic sectors that promote national development. Promoting investment, developing satellite systems, allocating and adjudicating orbital resources all are a challenge for our national legal regimes. Given that when it comes to the placement of satellites in outer space, these satellites become subject to the treaties and regulations that the international community has promoted in order to rationalize the manner in which this space is distributed. And Chairman, clearly national legislation where each and every country, in keeping with its own system, establishes the code of conduct that its governors must abide by. One of the mechanisms used to promote investment for services in this sector and in order to increase the number of orbital positions allocated to our country is a process of licensing for future orbital resources in keeping with the international processes that are in place for the coordination, allocation and registration of orbital positions and of the related frequency bands. And it's worth recalling that the act of requesting an orbital position in the geostationary orbit or other frequencies related to satellites either in the medium or in other or low orbits, in some cases, the Mexican state has no existing right or any expectations regarding this orbital position. This, in fact, would make it necessary to start a new process with the International Telecommunications Union in order to thus obtain an orbital position or a frequency allocation, for which previously there had been no right or expectation and where in fact there is no certainty that it may be obtained. Accordingly, the new law recognizes that the state can develop its own satellite systems in order to meet its needs in keeping with its governing mandate and to ensure the continuity of satellite systems that are governed by the federal government, as well as monitoring the efficient use of satellite capacity and services that are used by the site. In the same time, the state has the authority to grant concessions or licenses regarding orbital positions, allocated satellite orbits, and the related frequency bands. These can be granted to individuals. And this is the process that ensures proper regulation and which is part of our federal telecommunications law. This may, however, lead to a possible conceptual error, and here you might say that I'm referring only to the geostationary satellites. Here, the Mexican government is currently in the process of launching a tender for the construction of a third geostationary satellite. But, Chair, let me tell you that Mexico has new geostationary allocations, and in order to receive those, in keeping with the rules and provisions of the ITU, all of these satellites are indeed duly registered and have been duly registered with UNOSA, and this was a prior notification submitted to the Secretary General of the United Nations in keeping with the registration treaty. But here, there is a point that I must indeed draw your attention to. Like many other countries, Mexico also needs to use low-orbit satellites. However, my country has to comply with existing regulations. That means we must abide by the contents of the ITU radio communications regulations, as well as with the registration convention and with the liability regulation. And here I'm referring to the outer space treaties. And this is very significant, Chair. It's worth recalling because often we have the feeling that when we come to discussions here, we are highlighting that we don't have orbital positions. This is a forum where we can ensure that we can make use of the geostationary orbits that have already been allocated to us. We can continue to discuss them, launch a process for new allocations in keeping with the ITU, and that is indeed a discussion to be held with the ITU. Once we have upheld and met all necessary requirements, and once our geostationary orbit position is functioning, it has to be registered here with UNOSA. Today we are turning to a matter related to small satellites. In this regard, Mexico, like all other countries, believes that countries must abide by provisions in their national legislation. I would simply dare to highlight that there is a significant regulatory difference between small satellites and large satellites at the international level, whether they are of scientific experimental purpose or for safety and security applications. All satellites, be they small or large, must abide by the contents of the treaties and must uphold the treaties. But what is it that Mexico seeks, then, with regard to regulating space activities? The secondary legislation, which is currently being amended or modified within the Congress of Mexico, has as yet failed to address specific matters pertaining to space regulation. There is a wealth of legislation that we are drawing on, which have been issued by other governments, more than 20 laws that have been revised, restructured, and to date we have seen many of these laws have been entirely reshuffled because space technology and the progress in space technology is outstripping, going far beyond what we have actually set out previously in our treaties. The development of two legislative drafts is currently underway as part of the work launched by the Mexican Space Agency, and work on these two draft bills should be concluded by the end of 2018. These two new draft bills will touch upon matters pertaining to the mandatory and binding nature of the outer space treaties, as well as the provisions of the ITU Constitution and the radio communications regulation. It also includes many non-binding provisions that have been adopted within the United Nations General Assembly, and many more, which must be adopted by the government in order to ensure their full compliance. A further relevant regulation in this respect concerns public policies concerning a number of astronomical phenomena, such as space weather and near-Earth objects, NEOs. We also have secondary legislation in the pipeline on drone regulation. And clearly this has an impact on airspace. And we are in the process of developing a regulation on aerostatic drones because, quite frankly, they are causing a great deal of damage within controlled airspace. Chairman, we would also like to highlight that Mexico fulfills all the treaties that we have signed and ratified because they are national law. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico for her statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, I'm very pleased to be able to congratulate you, Chairman. You, as well as the chairman of the working groups, the members of the Secretariat, and to thank you all very much for the excellent preparatory work that has been undertaken in order to ensure the smooth arrangements of this meeting. We welcome new members to COPUOS. We welcome Finland, Mauritius, who have joined the ranks. And furthermore, we support the ISO candidature in order to be a permanent observer at this subcommittee. Our participation in this legal subcommittee's work is based on our firm belief in the important role of the subcommittee and its activities when it comes to the expansion and long-term sustainability of outer space affairs, in order also to ensure equitable access to these activities. Chair, As regards my country's activities in the sphere of space legislation, the UAE has a flexible and well-developed legislative array that is proactive, future-oriented in a number of areas when it comes to the energy sector, for instance. And this is the approach that we have adopted for the regulatory framework for space legislation. Our National Space Agency, amongst its prerogatives and as part of its mandate, which are set out in the Constituent Act of the UAE Space Agency, is responsible for developing legislative policies that are geared towards ensuring the utmost benefit is derived from resources from outer space and space technology and space applications, while ensuring the sustainability of these activities. Mr. Chairman. In 2016, the UAE enacted its national space policy, which comprises three main strands of action: principles governing the exploration and utilization of outer space, our aims and objectives, and means and measures for meeting this objective. Turning to the principles first. The main principles are as follows: upholding our obligations under international treaties and instruments. Turning to the goals and objectives. Here, turning to the fifth goal chiefly, which is ensuring the sustainability of the space environment. And as for the means and instruments to achieve these goals and objectives, here, this is about efforts taken to strengthen the regulatory framework that governs space activities, as well as a focus on international cooperation in space affairs. In 2018, we plan to enact the second space law in the UAE on the organization of space activities in the UAE, as well as the enactment of our national space strategy, entitled Space Program 2030. Turning to the space law first. This is a text that is aimed at attracting investment and striking a balance among the various needs encountered, that is safety, security, integrity, and protection of the Earth and space environments, as well as meeting economic needs, supporting innovation in particular for vanguard projects. It also addresses two new areas similar to suborbital space missions: launches from space, exploitation of space resources, and the establishment of human settlements in space, and other matters of global interest, including the mitigation of space debris. Mr. Chair, in 2017, a federal decree 77 was adopted. This federal decree sets out the UAE's adherence to the Rescue Treaty. As well as the responsibility for the implementation of this agreement is held by the Space Agency, working together with the other state institutions responsible in this area. The same applies to the second space law, which, as I said previously, is to be enacted before the end of 2018. The UAE has started work on the registration of national space objects, and this is based on a text adopted last year. This regulation is therefore in force already, nationally and internationally. Chair, we would like to share all of this information with you and to update you on these developments in order to bear witness to the UAE's adherence to international treaties, instruments, as well as to international custom governing space activities internationally. We have every belief in the importance of a legislative and regulatory framework nationally, as well as in international cooperation, which serves to drive sustainable development concerning space activities, ensuring the stability of the space environment. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates for his statement. There are no more speakers on my list on this agenda item, and I don't see any requests for the floor. So we will continue and hopefully conclude our consideration of agenda item 8, national legislation relevant to the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, this afternoon. Distinguished colleagues, now I would like to continue and our consideration of agenda item 9, capacity building in space law. The first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Japan.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the Government of Japan, I am pleased to address the 57th session of the Legal Subcommittee of COPUOS. I would like to report on Japan's effort to enhance capacity building in space law. Japan attaches great importance to providing education and training opportunities in the area of space law and to facilitate the exchange of information relating to space law as a means to enhancing capacity building in space law. In this regard, firstly, we would like to share some of the significant contributions made by JAXA in this important area. Since 2001, JAXA has been funding the winning team of the Asia-Pacific Regional Round of the Manfred Lux Space Law Moot Court competition organized by the IISL to participate in the World Finals. Last year, JAXA supported the team from the National Law School of India University as the winning team of the Asia-Pacific round, who also won the World Finals. In the past 17 years, JAXA has supported teams from Australia, India, New Zealand, and Singapore. We believe that JAXA's financial support has contributed to raising the overall level of the Asia-Pacific region's university programs relating to space law. In addition, JAXA continues to provide Japanese students with the opportunity to participate in ISC through its Space Education Center. Furthermore, JAXA has been running an online database containing the international space treaties and domestic space laws since 2008. In addition, JAXA has been accepting several students and legal apprentices as interns every year. These interns usually work in the Legal and Compliance Division of JAXA, where conducting research relating to international and domestic space law. We believe these opportunities could serve to train young and promising students who will one day become promising space law experts. Mr. Chairman, in addition to these JAXA's work, we are pleased to introduce a couple of notable activities undertaken at the University of Tokyo, Keio University, and Kyushu Institute of Technology, also a university. Firstly, the University of Tokyo Policy Alternative Research Institute, or PARI, which is a university-based think tank, has held a series of open workshops and seminars to discuss and to share information on space policy and governance. PADI has organized workshops in cooperation with NIAS, the National Institute of Advanced Studies in India, on the margins of the Asia-Pacific Region Space Agency Forum, or APRSAF, since 2013. During last year's workshop in Bangalore, several space policy researchers and experts from Asia-Pacific regions discussed space policy and law. On 4th March, the University of Tokyo, jointly with the Japanese Legal Institute, held an international workshop to discuss the legal issues of building moon bases and exploring the natural resources of outer space, with the participation with Ms. Simonetta Di Pippo, the director of UN-USA. Secondly, since the establishment of the Research Center for Space Law at Keio University in 2012, a series of space law workshops and seminars have been held with the participation of space law experts from abroad. In February this year, the Research Center for Space Law has held its 9th Space Law Symposium, where Prof. Philip Acklis, director of the Institute of Space and Telecommunications Law, or IDS, made a special presentation. Keio University's Graduate School of Law has a 2-year space law master course. Since its establishment, 14 graduate students, mostly from the Asia-Pacific region, have enjoyed this program. Lastly, Kyushu Institute of Technology, or QTech, in cooperation with UN-USA, has been working on the United Nations Japan Long-Term Fellowship Program on nanosatellite technologies for developing countries or non-spacefaring nations since 2013. This program provides students with in-depth knowledge of the technological as well as legal requirements of nanosatellite systems. Through the program, QTech invites space law experts to help deepen the students' understanding of space law. Selected candidates receive a grant under the Japanese governmental scholarship as research students for the during of their fellowship study. This year, we will welcome 3 students from Egypt, Malawi, and Nepal, and the master course three students from Egypt, Malawi, and Nepal in the master course, and 3 students from Algeria, Sudan, and Turkey in the doctorate course. Mr. Chairman, Japan will continue to contributing to capacity building in the field of space law and policy. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, we're pleased to inform you that the first United Nations Conference on Space Law and Policy, co-organized by the government of the Russian Federation and hosted by the state space corporation Roscosmos, will be held in Moscow from the 11th to the 13th September 2018. The objectives of the conference are as follows: to promote knowledge of the legal framework applicable to activities in outer space, thus serving the interests of spacefaring and developing nations; to draw attention of the authorities and decision-makers to topical issues of progressive development of international space law; to increase public awareness of the existing and possible challenges and threats in the area of space activities; to promote implementation and coordination of international cooperation in space-related fields in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. During the conference, a number of topics will be addressed, inter alia: progressive development of international space law, development of national regulatory frameworks, contribution of space law to economic and social development, as well as contribution of space law and policy to space governance and space security. The conference will become a platform for sharing views and ideas on legal aspects of space activities among decision and policymakers from national space agencies and governmental bodies, experts of the space community, business and academia, researchers and specialists involved in space activities, representing developing and developed nations from all economic regions. The official working language of the conference is English. Now we would like to give you a short overview of the conference. We plan to organize 5 sessions that will be held in the form of debates. During each session, there will be 2 moderators and up to 6 panelists on stage. The moderators will make introductory remarks to open their sessions, and after that, each panelist will present his or her respective position. The presentations will be followed by an open debate between the panelists. After the presentations and debates, the floor will be open for comments and questions from the audience. That is why the panelists should be ready to clarify, defend, and substantiate their respective positions. Finally, the moderators will summarize the results and close the session. With regard to the conference agenda, the first day will be the most intensive. It will start at 9 a.m. and will be over at 8 p.m. On the first day, we'll have 2 important issues to discuss. The first one is promoting responsible, peaceful, and safe use of outer space. Challenges and threats to the safety of space operations, security, and the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. Ways and means of maintaining outer space for peaceful purposes. The second topic for discussion will be legal aspects of space debris mitigation and remediation. During the day, there will be 2 coffee breaks and lunch. At 6 p.m., a reception on behalf of the Director General of Roscosmos will be organized. The second day will start at 9:30 a.m. and will be over at 6 p.m. During the second day, the following issues will be discussed: exploration, exploitation, and utilization of space resources, space traffic management as part of global space governance, and strengthening capacity building in space law. There will also be 2 coffee breaks and lunch. Finally, the third day, the closing day, will start at 9 a.m. and will be over at 1:30 p.m. From 1:30 p.m. to 6 p.m., a technical tour is scheduled to the Gagarin Research and Test Cosmonaut Training Center in the Star City. The center is responsible for training cosmonauts and astronauts for their space missions. We plan that the final report will be drafted at the outcome of the conference, which will be presented to UN COPUOS, as well as a brochure containing all presentations made, reflecting views expressed and positions stated by the speakers. These were the most important points on the substance of the event. We will now provide you with some information on the logistics. In order to visit Russia, foreigners, depending on their nationality, may have to obtain an entry visa. All visa applicants are required to possess a passport valid not less than 6 months after visa expiration. The Russian side is prepared to provide visa support for all applicants who have to provide a scanned copy of a passport and a fully completed application form that you can see on the screen now. Additional information on the visa process provided by the Russian side can be obtained from the Secretariat. In Moscow, there are 3 main international airports: Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Vnukovo. From each of the airports, you can either take a taxi or buy a ticket for Aeroexpress. Aeroexpress is a very comfortable and fast train. It takes only 30 to 40 minutes to get to the center of Moscow. Trains depart every 30 minutes. A ticket for Aeroexpress costs about €6. As for the registration deadline, the participants seeking for funding should be registered until the 25th of May 2018. Self-funded participants should register before the 1st of July 2018. The registration form will be available soon at the UN website. The conference venue is the Azimut Hotel Olympic Moscow, where we have booked a block of rooms for conference participants at special rates. An average special room rate for the conference period is about 120 euros. The hotel is located within walking distance of the Garden Ring, Prospect Mira and Dostoyevsky metro stations, next to the Olimpijski Sports Complex. The hotel offers a free shuttle bus for its guests to the main sites of Moscow, such as the Kremlin, the Red Square, St. Basil's Cathedral, State Historical Museum, and the Armory Chamber. Not far from the Red Square is the Bolshoi Theater, a symbol of Russia for all time. Those who are interested in art will have an opportunity to visit the Tretyakov Gallery and the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts. Adventurous persons can visit the most secret tour of Moscow to Bunker 42 on Taganka Street, a unique Stalin's bunker of the Cold War times. We would like to invite all of you, as well as your colleagues, to take part in the first United Nations Conference on Space Law and Policy. All the relevant information will be available soon at the UN website. We are looking forward to seeing you in Moscow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation for her statement and presentation. This initiative, we are looking forward to further details on that. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, there are no more speakers on my list, and I don't see any requests for the floor. So we will continue and hopefully conclude our consideration of Agenda Item 9, Capacity Building in Space Law, this afternoon. I would like to continue our consideration of Agenda Item 11, General Exchange of Information and Views on Legal Mechanisms Relating to Space Debris Mitigation and Remediation Measures, taking into account the work of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. The first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. Chairman, my delegation aligns itself with the statement of G77 and China. In view of the potential hazards of accidental collision of debris with space objects and further contamination of outer space, Pakistan supports the initiative aimed at mitigating the impact of and removal of space debris for space and sustainable space operations. Pakistan is also engaged in pursuing research related to space debris analysis and its mitigation measures based on space debris mitigation guidelines of the COPUOS. Mr. Chairman, Pakistan adheres to the registration of space objects and has been updating information regarding its space objects as and when required. Currently, Pakistan is operating a one communication satellite, namely PAKSAT-1R, in the geostationary orbit, which has efficient orbit maintenance and control mechanism. PAKSAT-1R will be deorbited to graveyard orbit at the end of its mission life, and necessary safety measures would be undertaken to avoid creation of space debris. Pakistan's first optical remote sensing satellite, PRSS-1, is also planned to be launched in 2018. The satellite will operate in LEO, for which proper maintenance of the orbiter parameters, debris mitigation, and collision avoidance maneuvering shall be performed. Moreover, satellite deorbit maneuvering shall also be performed at the end of its surface life, in line with the space debris mitigation guidelines. Mr. Chairman, with regard to the activities related to observation of near-Earth objects, NEOs, Pakistan has recently established an astronomical observatory with a 0.5 diameter telescope at Somiani. This observatory is planned to be connected with International Asteroid Observation Network for monitoring and cataloging of asteroid. Pakistan has also joined Space Missions Planning Advisory Group, SMPAG, and supports the work plan of SMPAG to prepare its international response to a new impact threat through documentation and implementation of preventive measures. Mr. Chairman, much of the orbital debris that exist in the outer space is a result of past operations of major spacefaring nations. Therefore, Pakistan is of view that the responsibility to remove and mitigate the debris impacts as well as to assist new entrants, both technically and financially, in mitigating space debris rests primarily with the advanced spacefaring nations. The high implementation cost of the space debris mitigation guidelines deters access of the emerging spacefaring nations to outer space in contravention of the relevant UN General Assembly resolutions. Mr. Chairman, Pakistan supports all initiatives at the national as well as the international levels aimed at developing mechanisms for implementation of necessary measures based on space debris mitigation guidelines of COPUOS. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan for his statement. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Chairman. The UAE takes the matter of space debris seriously. As mentioned earlier in our coming law, we're stressing this matter in a separate article, requesting operators, regardless of their nature, academic, researchers, commercial, as well as government, to take into account best practices in this regarding and the directions from the Space Agency in this matter. And these practices apply to the mission before, during the planning, as well as the operation, as well as the end of that mission. At the same time, my colleagues in the Space Agency are working together, hands in hands with the industry, as well as the academic and research institutes in the UAE who are involved in space and space objects, as well as development of small sats. They're working together in developing this best practices that is going to apply to our industry. And I think that's a good approach from day one, to have the buy-in and to apply something that will be implementable as soon as it is issued. My colleague today in the afternoon is going to give a presentation about where we are in this regard. We would like to thank the Secretariat and the UNUSA and this committee in the development of the compendium that actually shares the best practices applied by the different countries, and that was definitely a good reference for our study and for our benchmark. And we would like to see this continue and probably enhance the structure of such compendium to make it easier for everyone to see all the progress that is happening in that compendium. We also value very much the resolution 62217 that was issued by the General Assembly, approving the guideline that was developed by COPUOS for the debris mitigation. However, Mr. Chairman, I think, as mentioned in the report of the Legal Subcommittee in 2017, it's probably worth looking at this guideline and see if there is an area for enhancement. Between 2007 and 2018, I believe there has been some improvements and big announcements, especially when it comes to small sat. I think also we have done a great achievement in the long-term sustainability guidelines, which touches in some of the areas related to debris. So there's probably a room for alignment between what's mentioned also in the guideline for debris and what we're going to achieve with regards to the long-term sustainability guidelines. Given this, Mr. Chairman, we hope to reflect our views in this regard in your report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates, and the next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the floor under this agenda item so as to express Ukraine's point of view as pertains to space debris. We are of the view that space debris is one of the biggest problems in current outer space activities. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of COPUOS has been dealing with this issue since its 31st session in 1994. That means for just about 25 years. Currently, the subcommittee has a very solid practical foundation to be dealing with this. For that reason, we should necessarily take into account the decisions and recommendations of the subcommittee to reduce, detect, monitor, and remove space debris, even if most of the results may be solely technological. On the other hand, the legal subcommittee should acknowledge the role and achievements of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, as this could be material for discussions on a legal framework. I would further point out that over past decades, several scientific and technological projects for the removal of space debris in orbit have been developed. Unfortunately, they haven't been implemented, as their updating leads to several legal issues which don't yet fall within the scope of application of the guidelines. Discussions regarding these issues falls within the purview of this subcommittee. Of course, while taking into account the achievements or progress made by the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. Let's take for an example the idea of space debris, as drafted by the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. Defining this idea first was to be found in the Technical Report on Space Debris of 1999. It called space debris, and I quote, "any objects produced by human beings, including their fragments or elements, whether or not their owners can be identified, in orbit, around the Earth, or entering into dense atmospheric layers that are no longer functional or cannot resume functioning as planned, or any other function for which they may be authorized." This is a definition that was taken up, albeit in abridged form, in the guidelines on reducing space debris from COPUOS. Absent a definition in treaties on outer space, we need guidance through non-legally binding documents, first and foremost, the COPUOS guidelines. Yet the question does arise. Is the definition I've mentioned a sufficient basis for a legal regime governing space debris? The cornerstone here is whether or not we can consider debris as a space object, fully or partially. Given that the legal regime of the latter is governed by outer space treaties, unlike space debris. Would this definition help us deciding who would cover damage caused by space debris, given that sometimes this could be significant damage? What's the role of the registering state? If the jurisdiction and control or monitoring of the registering state is ongoing on the object that has become debris, which is extremely important in case of damage. The other question put by the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee during its 52nd session, and one which we would like to point out here, is that coordinated effort is necessary to deal with the technological and financial aspects of the removal of debris. One of the most promising solutions for this type of coordination, in our view, would be to establish an international trust fund for the removal of space debris. The financial contribution of each spacefaring state would depend on their role in polluting outer space through debris. Many other questions come to the fore, as well as discussions stemming from the documents of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which merit discussion on our subcommittee as well. Sir, I should like to note that in Ukraine, the law on space activities does not regulate the issue of space debris. Nonetheless, in 2006, the National Agency for Outer Space adopted a standard, one which guides national procedure as for reducing space debris. The standard is called Regulations for Outer Space Activities in Ukraine, Limiting Pollution of Outer Space, Close Outer Space, when space technology is used. The document draws on the guidelines for the reduction of space debris of COPUOS, as well as the relevant document of the Interinstitutional Coordination Committee. By way of conclusion, sir, I would like to reiterate our desire to take part in the processes for drafting and promoting a legal regime to reduce risk having to do with space debris. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine for her statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States is pleased that the Legal Subcommittee is continuing to exchange information regarding national mechanisms related to space debris mitigation measures. We also want to commend the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which endorsed an initial set of 12 non-legally binding guidelines on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities in 2016, and has since then closed discussion on an additional 9 guidelines, bringing the total up to 21. The STSC deserves great credit for their work on the LTS guidelines over a number of years, and the United States looks forward to bringing our work of the LTS Working Group to a successful conclusion in June. Additionally, the United States is in the process of undertaking a comprehensive review on how we are implementing the 21 guidelines, with the aim of sharing our efforts during the upcoming June COPUOS session. The United States has long recognized the importance of managing the creation and effects of space debris, and those U.S. government departments and agencies that participate in and license outer space activities have a robust framework of statutes, regulations, and internal policies that take into account space debris mitigation from the design stage of a satellite or space launch system to its end-of-life disposal. We provided a detailed overview of U.S. mechanisms during the 49th session of the Legal Subcommittee. And at the 53rd session of the Subcommittee, we were pleased to contribute a description of the complex set of laws, regulations, and policies the United States uses to implement debris mitigation. We are encouraged that a number of member states and intergovernmental organizations have developed debris guidelines, and believe that the implementation by even more spacecraft operators is vital to the safety and long-term sustainability of spaceflight. But let me explain why the United States takes these measures and makes these investments in debris mitigation. We do not do so out of a sense that they are required by international law. Rather, we do so because of our strong interest in the safety and long-term sustainability of space activities, and our judgment that these practices represent sound approaches to debris mitigation. As delegations are no doubt aware, approaches to mitigating debris are linked to evolving technologies, and as technologies change, so too do the available methods for debris mitigation, as well as the cost-benefit trade-offs of doing so. Given the evolving technical aspects of debris mitigation, and the practical, economic reality that existing platforms cannot be replaced overnight, we do not see the wisdom in codifying debris mitigation standards into international law at this time. Safety and sustainability in space are of paramount importance for the United States, and we will continue to support wholeheartedly international cooperation to further debris mitigation technology and techniques. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we look forward to continued discussions on these issues.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States for his statement. And now I give the floor again to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry for asking for the floor again, but I wanted to speak about a couple of items that we didn't have a chance to speak about before, which is related to small sat, very related also to the matter of debris and STM. With regards to the small sat, and which is very relevant, of course, the discussion of debris, we first value very much the handout that was distributed in 2015, which is the guidance on small sat. I'll just try to read the guidance on space object registration and frequency management for small and very small satellites. This handout that was done between UNUSA and the ITU. I think this is very useful for a number of administrations, including our administration, and it's a very beneficial, and it's actually emphasized the importance of applying the principles on space law to small sat. Second part, we also value very much the questionnaire and the answers received to this meeting by Austria, Germany, and Brazil, and others. This is very helpful, and in our, I think in next meeting of the LSC, we'll try to also provide answers to these questionnaires from the UAE perspective. However, of course, Mr. Chairman, would like to stress out under this agenda that the risk of small sat comes from the accumulation of the larger number. And of course, we should react here, let me say respond in a proactive way to the higher demand that is coming from commercial and academic in this regard. This also includes from the UAE. And I think having proper guidelines that on how to deal with this demand from the industry, it's very important and should prioritize the way we deal with this agenda item. Last but not least, of course, the risks that comes from small sat is not only physical, but it also can be related to frequency and other, let me say, electronic matters. Last item I would like to talk about, Mr. Chairman, which I'd like also to reflect, is STM, Space Traffic Management, sir. We highly appreciate the inclusion of this agenda item in the LSC. I think that was a good decision. We also value the work that was done by the IAA in this regard by developing the COSMIC report that was issued in 2017. However, Chairman, the concern we have from the UAE is with regards to this agenda item having it in LSC, that as it currently stands, STM is very broad. It includes everything from launch to operation to end of mission to re-entry. It also has different disciplines, different pillars, from capabilities and systems to governance to regulations. And in our understanding, we should streamline what we expect from this agenda item under the LSC and probably define the main components and pass some of them to the scientific subcommittee, which probably could deal with other parts. Also, Chairman, I think it's probably wise to establish some sort of an ad hoc group who could put together a questionnaire on what states are working on today when it comes to STM and probably general questions about STM that could be circulated. And this ad hoc group also could work on defining the main components expected to be dealt with under this agenda item so we can contribute and come up with something concrete. This should also take into account what is happening on the long-term sustainability. Some of great work related to STM has been done in there. We should focus on the delta. Especially in the LSC, we should look at what do we need in terms of regulations and legislations when it comes to STM. So we keep ourselves focused in this regard. Last but not least, on STM, I think the added value today will be matters related to launch and re-entry, as most of the matters related to operations in space, in my view, has been dealt with in other guidance, whether in the debris guidance or in the registration or in the long-term sustainability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates for his statement. There are no more speakers on my list, and I don't see any requests for the floor. So we will continue and hopefully conclude our consideration of agenda item 11 on space debris mitigation and remediation measures this afternoon. Distinguished colleagues, I will shortly adjourn this meeting, but before doing so, as usual, I would like to inform you of our plans for this afternoon. We will meet promptly at 3 p.m. At the time, we will continue and hopefully conclude our consideration of Agenda Item 8, national legislation relevant to the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, Agenda Item 9, capacity building in space law, and Agenda Item 11, general exchange of information and views on legal mechanisms relating to space debris mitigation and remediation measures, taking into account the work of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. Following the adjournment of the plenary this afternoon, the working group on the status and application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space will hold its 10th meeting. Today at lunchtime, starting 1 p.m., there will be one technical presentation. Are there any questions or comments on this proposed schedule? I see none. Now I invite the chair of the working group on the status and application of the 5 United Nations Treaties on Outer Space to hold its 9th meeting. And this meeting is adjourned until 3 p.m.